The road into Delham Flats was not really a road. It was more an understanding between wagon wheels and cracked earth, a suggestion of direction pressed into the Wyoming dirt by years of repetition. Harper had been following it since before sunrise, and by the time the sun crested the low ridge to the east and turned the pale sky a color somewhere between ash and gold, her feet had already told her everything they had to say on the matter. She was 31 years old. She was large, had always been large, the kind of large that people noticed before they noticed anything else about her, the kind that made strangers rearrange their faces into expressions they thought were neutral but weren't. She carried it the way she carried most things, straight-backed, without apology, though the apology was sometimes right there behind her eyes, waiting to be needed. The carpet bag in her right hand held 2 dresses, a spare pair of stockings, a folding knife her father had left her, a pouch of dried beans, and a letter of reference from a woman named Mrs. Opal Trent of Cheyenne, who had employed Harper as a housekeeper for 4 years before dying quietly in her sleep the previous October. The letter was warm and specific and signed in a shaking hand, and it had not helped her at the last 7 places she'd tried. 7 ranches, 7 assessments made in under a minute. The Hargrove place had been the worst. She'd knocked and the door had opened, and the man standing there, red-faced, not unkind-looking, had taken one long look at her and said, without a flicker of embarrassment, "We need someone who can work, miss." As if her body were a verdict, as if he could see her insides from the porch. She hadn't said anything back. She'd learned not to. The things she could have said would not have helped her situation, and her situation was what mattered. What mattered now was this. She had approximately $4 and some odd cents, the weather was turning, and the next town of any size was a day and a half east on foot. She was not going east. Going east meant going backward, and Harper Calloway had a complicated relationship with backward. The Boone Ranch appeared around a long curve in the road, and her first thought was that it had given up. The fence line along the eastern pasture had collapsed in at least 3 places, the split rails lying in the yellow grass like something exhausted. The barn needed 2 boards replaced on its south face. The kitchen garden, visible from the road, had gone to seed. Not recently, but over time, the way things went to seed when nobody had the energy to keep arguing with them. A milk pail sat overturned near the well and had clearly been there long enough to rust at the rim. But there was smoke coming from the chimney, which meant someone was alive in there, and there was a horse in reasonable shape standing in the paddock, which meant someone still had enough left in them to care for something. Harper stopped at the gate. She looked at the house for a moment. She looked at the collapsed fence. She thought about the man at the Hargrove place, and his face, and the way he'd said it, someone who can work. And she thought about the $4 in her bag and the day and a half to the next town. Then she heard the baby. The sound was coming through a window on the near side of the house, thin and relentless. The particular cry of an infant who had been at it for a long time and had not yet been given a reason to stop. It wasn't the sharp spike of a cry that meant sudden pain. It was the grinding, exhausted wail of a child who needed something that wasn't being provided and had no way of understanding why. Harper opened the gate and walked up the path. She knocked. Nothing happened for long enough that she knocked again, louder. The door opened. The man standing there looked like someone had been using him hard for about 2 years without giving him a day off. He was tall, dark-haired, and somewhere in his mid-30s, with the kind of jaw that would have been handsome if he'd had time to sleep. He was holding the screaming infant against his left shoulder and doing a rocking motion that he'd clearly been doing for so long it had stopped working, if it had ever worked. His shirt had something on it. Harper chose not to identify it specifically. His eyes were the flat, distant color of someone running on nothing. He looked at her. She waited for the expression, the rearrangement, the assessment. It didn't come. Or if it did, it happened so fast that it was immediately buried under the far more pressing reality of the screaming baby, the failing shoulder, and whatever else was happening inside that house. "Can I help you?" he said. It wasn't really a question. It was the noise a person makes when they're trained to make noise at strangers, even when they have nothing left. "I'm Harper Calloway," she said. "I'm looking for work, housekeeping, cooking, childcare. I've got a letter of reference." She didn't reach for it yet. "But first, when did that baby last eat?" He blinked. "What?" "The baby. When did she eat last?" He He looked down at the infant on his shoulder as if he'd briefly forgotten she was a separate being with needs. I tried to give her the bottle, but she wouldn't. Is there cow's milk in the house? Yes, there's... Goat? No, just cow's milk will do. Is there a clean pot? He stared at her. The baby kept crying. Mr. Boone, he said. Riker Boone. Mr. Boone, I'm not going to walk in and take over your home. That's not what I'm doing. But that baby sounds like she's been crying for a couple of hours, and she's getting toward the point where she'll wear herself out. And if you'll let me come in and warm some milk, I can at least stop that part of the problem. Everything else we can talk about after. Riker Boone looked at her for another moment. He looked at the baby. He looked back at her. He stepped aside. What? The inside of the house confirmed what the outside had suggested. Not filth exactly, but the accumulated disorder of someone who had been managing too many things for too long and had started triaging. The dishes were washed, but stacked wrong. There was a basket of laundry in the middle of the floor that had been there long enough to become furniture. The hearth had ash that needed clearing. The table had the remains of a meal that was probably yesterday's. And in the corner of the main room, sitting very still on a wooden chair with a rag doll in her lap, was a little girl of about 6 who was watching Harper with the particular stillness of a child who has learned that stillness is safer than attention. Hello, Harper said to her, keeping her voice level. Not bright, not performatively cheerful, just even. Hello, the girl said. What's your name? Daisy. I'm Harper. I'm going to warm some milk for your sister. Is that all right with you? Daisy considered this with the gravity of someone twice her age. She's been crying since this morning, she said finally. I know. I could hear her from the road. Something shifted in the girl's face. Not quite relief, but adjacent to it. The acknowledgement that the problem was real, that someone else had noticed. Harper found the pot. She found the milk, covered on the kitchen shelf, still good. She found a clean cloth she could fold into a makeshift nipple and thought about what temperature would work. The process of feeding a young infant from a cloth and bottle arrangement was something she'd learned 15 years ago helping a neighbor whose wife had died 2 days after the birth, and the knowledge was still there, specific and useful, the way practical knowledge tends to be. While the milk warmed, she looked around the kitchen and began making a quiet inventory. There was food, more than she'd expected. Cured meat hanging in the larder, dried beans, flour, lard, some aging vegetables that still had use left in them. Someone had been provisioning, if not cooking. The garden outside had gone to seed, but the larder hadn't, which meant Riker Boone was more organized than he looked, or there was someone helping him she hadn't met yet. She tested the milk on her wrist, decided it was close enough, and went back to the main room. Riker was still doing the rocking motion, his face somewhere between desperate and gone. The baby's cries had developed a kind of ragged edge that meant she was tiring herself out. Here, Harper said, and she held out her hands. He looked at her hands. She could see him thinking about it. This stranger, this woman he'd known for 4 minutes, this large, unknown person in his kitchen. I know, she said quietly. But I know what I'm doing, and I think you need to sit down before you fall down. So, he transferred the baby to her. The baby didn't immediately stop crying. That wasn't how it worked. But Harper shifted her to the right angle, offered the milk on the cloth, and the baby, more by reflex than decision, began to suck at it. The crying hitched, stalled, and broke apart into small wet hiccups. Then quiet. The particular quality of quiet that only exists in contrast to a sound that's been going on too long. Riker Boone sat down in the nearest chair and put his face in his hands. Daisy watched all of this from her corner without moving. Harper sat in the other chair and kept the milk coming and didn't say anything, because some moments don't need narration. The baby's name was Charlotte. She was 4 months old and her mother had died of a fever 6 weeks after the birth, which meant Charlotte had never had one, and had spent her short life with a man who loved her absolutely and had no idea what he was doing. Riker told Harper this in pieces, haltingly, the way someone tells a stranger something they haven't said aloud to anyone. Not because they've chosen the stranger, but because the stranger is there and it needs to come out. I had a woman from town coming by, he said. Mrs. Faber. She helped for a while, but she's got her own family, and it's getting to be too much. And she told me last week she couldn't come anymore. He paused. I've been trying. I can see that, Harper said. The ranch is... There's a lot wrong with it. I know that. I've been letting things go that I shouldn't. He stopped, started again. It's hard to fix a fence when the baby won't stop crying. Yes, Harper said. It is. Charlotte had fallen asleep in her arms. Daisy had migrated from her corner to a spot approximately 3 feet closer, with the rag doll still watching. You said you have a reference letter, Riker said. I do. She'd have to shift the baby to get it. She didn't move. Where were you before this? Cheyenne. Kept house for a woman named Opal Trent for 4 years. She passed last fall. She paused. Before that, I was in Nebraska. Did some ranch work, some housekeeping. I'm good with children. I can cook for a working household, not fancy food, but filling. I can manage a kitchen garden if there's one to manage, and I can help with some of the lighter outdoor maintenance. She looked at him steadily. I'll tell you what I can't do. I can't do the heavy writing work or the serious carpentry, but if you need someone to keep this house running so you can focus on the land, that I can do. He was quiet for a moment. You walked up that path pretty quick, he said. Most people, when they first come to the door, they take a look at the place and their face does something. I expect so. Yours didn't. I've seen worse, she said. And I've seen what a place looks like when someone's trying under hard circumstances. That's different from not trying. Something in his face shifted. Not warmth exactly. Warmth wasn't what this man had available right now, but something that recognized being seen. I can't pay much, he said. Room, board, and something small, Harper said. We can talk about the number when I've been here a week and you've decided whether you want to keep me. A week, he repeated. A week, she said. If at the end of it you'd rather I go, I'll go without argument. I'm not asking you to make a permanent decision about a stranger. I'm asking you to let me be useful for a week and see how it goes. He looked at Charlotte, asleep in Harper's arms. He looked at Daisy, who had inched another foot closer and was now within touching distance of Harper's chair. You can sleep in the room off the kitchen, he said. There's a cot in there. That'll do fine, Harper said. When? She started that evening, not with grand gestures or announcements. She started the way she always started, which was by finding the smallest thing that needed doing and doing it, and then finding the next one. The dishes were already washed, so she stacked them correctly. She found the laundry basket and sorted it and decided what could wait and what couldn't. She assessed the larder with a critical eye and figured out what needed using before it turned, and she started a stew with the aging vegetables and the cured meat, because stew was the right choice. It filled a kitchen with smell, and smell mattered in a house like this, which had stopped smelling like a home some time ago. Daisy followed her at a careful distance the whole time, not speaking, just watching. At one point, Harper turned and found her standing in the kitchen doorway with the rag doll held against her chest. You want to help? Harper said. Daisy considered this. I don't know how to do most things. Most things can be learned, Harper said. Can you tear bread into small pieces? Yes. Good. There's a heel of bread on that shelf. Tear it into small pieces and put them in the pot. Not too small. About like this. She held up her fingers to show the size. Daisy came into the kitchen. It was such a small thing. A 6-year-old tearing bread into a pot of stew. But Harper watched her do it with a focus and seriousness that the task didn't technically require, and understood that Daisy was the kind of child who had learned to be invisible in her own house and was trying to figure out whether that was still necessary. You're doing it right, Harper said. Daisy kept tearing. Riker came in at dark and stopped in the kitchen doorway and stood there for a moment with an expression that was hard to read. The house smelled like stew and wood smoke. Charlotte was asleep in her basket by the hearth. Daisy was at the table with a cup of warm milk and a biscuit that Harper had put together in the last half hour. Not her best biscuit, but a solid one, and she had the rag doll propped against her cup like it was also having supper. Smells good, Riker said. His voice was a little rough. Sit down, Harper said. It's ready. He washed his hands at the basin and sat. She ladled the stew and put the biscuits on the table and poured him coffee and sat across from him. There was an awkwardness to it. Two strangers at a table, the space where a wife had been, the particular weight of that absence. But Harper had learned long ago that you could acknowledge weight without being crushed by it. "How's the fence on the east pasture?" she said. He looked up. "How'd you know about the fence?" "I walked in from the east." "Oh." He took a spoonful of stew. Something moved across his face. "It's been down for 3 weeks. The horse keeps getting into the neighbor's field. Harmon's been patient about it, but he won't be patient forever." "How long to fix it if you had a day clear?" "Half a day," he said. "Maybe less. I just haven't had—" "Tomorrow morning, I'll manage the house. You fix the fence." He looked at her. "I know what I said about it being a week," she said. "I'm not trying to move in. I'm saying tomorrow I'll be here so you can fix the fence." She looked back at her stew. "Harmon's patience is worth something. Don't spend it." After a moment, he said, "All right." They ate. Daisy ate her biscuit in small, deliberate bites and fed small, invisible bites to the rag doll between her own. Charlotte slept. The fire had gotten down but not gone out, and the kitchen was warm enough. It wasn't comfort, exactly, but it was the shape of it. The second day, Harper found the kitchen garden. It was worse up close than it had been from the road, but not unrecoverable. The problem wasn't the soil. The soil was good, black and deep, the kind of Wyoming bottomland soil that would grow almost anything with encouragement. The problem was that it had been competing with weeds for what she estimated was about 6 weeks, since around the time Riker had lost his wife, and the weeds were winning. She spent the morning on it while Charlotte slept in a basket she'd moved to the back step where she could hear her. She didn't clear the whole thing. It would have taken 2 days, and her back would have quit on her by noon. She cleared a section. The section with the carrots, because carrots could still be useful, and a smaller section where she thought she could get something to come up before the weather turned. Daisy appeared after breakfast and stood by the garden fence. "What are you doing?" she said. "Arguing with weeds." "Who's winning?" "Me. Today. Ask me again tomorrow." Harper sat back on her heels and looked at the girl. "Your mama planted this?" A small pause. "Yes." She knew what she was doing. "The layout's good. When I clear it properly, there might be more here than it looks like." Daisy came through the gate and crouched down to look at the carrot tops Harper had uncovered. "She used to let me pick the carrots," she said. It wasn't a sad sentence. It was a factual one, stated plainly, the way children state facts about absent things when they're trying to make those things real again. "Then you can pick these," Harper said, "when they're ready." "How long?" 2, maybe 3 weeks, depending on weather. Daisy pulled at a small weed near the carrot row with more focus than was technically necessary. "She's been gone since Charlotte was little," she said. "I know. Papa doesn't talk about her. That's hard. He cries sometimes," Daisy said, still pulling weeds, not looking up. "At night when he thinks I'm asleep, I can hear through the wall." Harper didn't say anything for a moment. She kept working. "You know," she said finally, "that just means he loved her very much." "I know." Daisy sat back. "I just wish he didn't do it alone." Harper looked at this 6-year-old with her practical hands and her rag doll and her 2 old eyes and thought about the things children absorb in a house full of grief, the way they become careful, the way they learn to manage their presence. "You're a good girl, Daisy," she said, not as a pleasantry, as a statement of observed fact. Daisy looked at her directly for the first time. Then she went back to the weeds. By the end of the first week, the fence was repaired, the laundry was caught up, the kitchen garden was cleared, Charlotte had developed something resembling a feeding schedule, and Daisy had started talking to Harper at a volume that didn't require leaning in to hear. Riker said nothing about the week being up. Harper said nothing either. The days settled into a shape. Riker rose before light and was out by the time Harper had the fire built up and the coffee going. She fed Charlotte and got Daisy dressed and started the morning's work. Some days Riker came in for midday, some days she left something on the stove, and he came in and ate whenever the morning's work allowed. Evenings they ate together, and they had learned to talk by then. Not intimately, not yet, but practically. About the ranch and what it needed, about Daisy's reading, which was behind where it should be, and which Harper had taken in hand with a primer she'd found on the shelf. "She's smart," Harper told him one evening after Daisy had gone to bed. "I know," he he said. But she's missed some. She needs regular time with the books, or she'll lose ground. I don't have time for— I'll do it, Harper said. I'm not putting that on you. I'm telling you so you know it's happening. He looked at her. He did that sometimes. Looked at her as if he was catching up to something she'd already decided. You don't have to do everything, he said. I'm not doing everything, Harper said. I'm doing my part. The teaching is my part if I'm here anyway. You're doing more than your part, he said quietly. I like useful, she said. I've never seen the point of doing less than you can. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, The people in town have been talking. She'd been waiting for this. I expect so. I went in for supplies yesterday, heard some things. About me. About the situation, he said carefully. About a woman being here. Some people have opinions. People always have opinions about women who go places they're not expected. She looked at him steadily. Does it bother you? What they're saying bothers me, he said. Not the situation. Then don't let it change anything, Harper said. Unless it does bother you, in which case tell me honestly and I'll respect that. He was quiet again. He had a way of going quiet that wasn't evasion. It was something closer to actual thought, which she'd come to appreciate. It doesn't change anything, he said. Harper nodded and went back to her mending. It was on the 9th day that Garrett Boone rode in. She was in the yard when the horse came up the road, a better horse than Riker's, which told her something, and a man on it with the kind of posture that told her something else, confident in the way that had nothing to do with the situation at hand and everything to do with habit. Broad-shouldered, dark like Riker, but with something smoother about the face, something that had spent more time around people who looked at it and less time facing the wind. He came through the gate and looked at her, and the change in his expression was immediate and particular. Not the regular assessment, the dismissal of her size, the rearrangement she was used to. Something else. A recognition. He knew her. She could see it in the tightening around his eyes, the way he shifted in the saddle, the pause before he spoke. She kept her face still and waited. This the Boone Ranch? He said, which was absurd given that he was clearly Riker's brother. It is, Harper said. I'm Garrett, Riker's brother. He around? He's in the back pasture. I can get him or you can ride around. He dismounted. He was looking at her the way someone looks at a thing they recognize but wish they didn't. You work here? He said. I do. Housekeeper? Among other things. He tied his horse to the post and came close enough that his voice dropped, and she knew before he opened his mouth that this was the conversation she'd been dreading, the one she'd known was eventually coming, the one she'd hoped might not come from this direction, and not this soon. I know who you are, he said. She met his eyes. Then you know my name, she said. I told you. It's Harper Calloway. I know what happened in Laramie, he said. The name of the town landed on her like a hand on a bruise. She kept her face where it was. That was a long time ago, she said. 3 years isn't long, he said. And my brother has 2 daughters and a ranch, and he doesn't know what you are. What I was, she said quietly. And you don't know what you think you know. I know enough. His voice was low but certain, the voice of a man who had decided. I know you need to leave before he finds out. I know it would be better if you went quietly, and better still if this whole thing just didn't happen. He looked at her, not unkindly, which was almost the worst part. He looked at her the way someone looks when they're trying to be reasonable about a decision they've already made. You seem like you've done decent work here. I'm not saying you're a bad woman. I'm saying you're the wrong woman. For this family. For this situation. Harper looked at the house. She looked at the yard, the fence line Riker had repaired, the kitchen garden she'd cleared row by row, the window of the room where Charlotte was sleeping through her afternoon nap on a schedule she'd finally, blessedly achieved. She looked back at Garrett. I'll be here when Riker comes in, she said. If you want to talk to him, you're welcome to wait. Garrett's eyes narrowed. You're not going to make this easy. I don't think making things easy for the wrong people is something I'm required to do, she said. Supper's at 6 if you're staying. She went back into the house. Her hands were steady. She was proud of that. The whole walk to the kitchen, the whole time she stood at the shelf pretending to assess dinner options. She was proud that her hands were steady. It was her face when she caught it reflected in the dark window glass that had given her away. She looked like someone bracing for impact, like someone who had been bracing for impact for so long that the bracing had become the posture, and the posture had become the self, and she had no idea anymore what she looked like when she wasn't waiting for something to hurt her. She turned away from the window and started on supper. Whatever Garrett Boone knew, or thought he knew, she wasn't running. Not yet, not this time. Garrett stayed for supper. Harper had half expected him to ride back out before Riker came in from the pasture to regroup, to come back on a day when he had more time to arrange his argument. But he stayed, and she couldn't decide if that made him braver or more dangerous. She set a third place at the table without comment and kept her back to the room while she worked, listening to the sound of the two brothers greeting each other in the yard, the thud of hands on shoulders, Riker's voice lifting slightly, something warming in it that she hadn't heard before. He was glad to see him. Of course he was. Riker had been out here alone for months, and whatever else Garrett was, he was family. That complicated things. Daisy came in from the back of the house at the sound of voices and stopped in the kitchen doorway when she saw Harper's face. "What's wrong?" she said. "Nothing," Harper said. "Set the bread on the table for me." Daisy looked at her for another moment with those careful eyes, then took the bread. The brothers came in together, and the dynamic in the room shifted the way rooms shift when a new person enters who already has opinions about the furniture. Garrett looked around the kitchen, at the cleared shelves, the mended curtain, the pot on the stove, Charlotte asleep in her basket. And his expression did something complicated that he didn't quite manage to hide. "Place looks different," he said to Riker. "Harper's been here 10 days, Riker said, as if that explained everything, because to him it did. Garrett looked at Harper. She put the stew on the table. "Sit down," she said neutrally, to the room in general. They sat. The meal was quieter than usual, which was saying something, because meals at the Boone table were not loud to begin with. Garrett asked Riker questions about the ranch, about the east pasture, about the stock count, about a property line dispute he seemed to already know about. And Riker answered in the straightforward way he answered most things. And Harper ate and listened and learned more about this family in 40 minutes than she'd pieced together in 10 days. The Boone brothers had grown up on a ranch 2 counties east. Their father had left Garrett, the home property, and Riker this one, which was smaller and had come with the condition of development, meaning Riker had to make something of it or lose it to the terms of the will. The ranch had been coming along before Ellen, before Riker's wife, before everything stopped. Now it was behind in ways that could still be recovered from, but only barely, and only with the kind of sustained effort that was hard to sustain when a man was running on no sleep and no help. Garrett knew all of this. He watched his brother across the table with the particular worry of someone who cares but doesn't know how to say so without it coming out as criticism. Harper understood something then, which was that Garrett's problem with her was not simple cruelty. It was fear dressed up as reason. He was afraid his brother was going to make a mistake, and he had decided she was the mistake. And he had made that decision before he had any real information about her because making it quickly was easier than sitting with the uncertainty. She understood it. Understanding it didn't make it easier to live with. After supper, Riker took Garrett out to look at the barn, something about a roof joint that needed a second opinion, and Harper cleared the table and washed the dishes and listened to Daisy read haltingly from the primer they'd been working through. "Sound it out," Harper said when Daisy stopped at a word. "Con? Con. You know those letters." "Consider," Daisy said slowly. "That's it. Keep going." Through the window, she could see the 2 brothers out by the barn, talking. Garrett was doing most of it. Riker had his arms crossed and his head down, the posture of a man listening to something he's not sure he wants to hear. She looked back at the primer. "Harper? Why does my uncle look at you like that?" She kept her eyes on the page. "Like what?" "Like he's trying to figure something out." "I'm new," Harper said. "People look at new things carefully. It's sensible." She tapped the page. "Next sentence." Daisy read the next sentence. She was getting better, day by day, in the incremental way that children improve when someone is paying consistent attention. Not through leaps, but through the steady accumulation of small corrections that eventually add up to competence. Harper had seen it happen before, and she felt a quiet satisfaction in watching it happen again. The kind that didn't need acknowledging out loud. Riker came back in alone. Garrett had gone to set up in the barn. He was staying the night, apparently, maybe longer. "You have things to say?" Harper asked, not looking up from the primer. A pause. "He worries," Riker said. "That's his right." "He means well." "Most people do," she said. "Meaning well doesn't always look like it from where the meaning is being aimed at." Riker was quiet. She heard him pour himself coffee and sit at the table. "He asked me how much I knew about you," he said. "What did you tell him?" "That you worked for Opal Trent in Cheyenne for 4 years, and that you've been more useful in 10 days than I've been in 6 weeks. He paused. He said that wasn't what he meant. "I expect not." He said there were things that he'd heard something. From someone in Laramie. He didn't say what it was. Just that there was something I should know before... Riker stopped, reorganized. Before things went further in whatever direction they were going. Harper closed the primer. Daisy had gone quiet, reading the temperature of the room the way she always did. "Daisy," Harper said, "go check on Charlotte for me." Daisy slid off the chair and went, casting one backward look over her shoulder. Harper folded her hands on the table. She thought about what to say, how much to say it, in what order, and in what voice. "There are things in my past," she said finally, "things that people have opinions about. Your brother being one of them, apparently." She met Riker's eyes. "I'm not going to tell you it's nothing, because it isn't nothing. But I'm also not going to tell you the whole of it at Garrett's insistence, because whatever your brother thinks he knows, he doesn't know my part of it, and I'd rather you hear that part from me when I'm ready to tell it." Riker looked at her steadily. "Are you going to tell me?" "Yes," she said, "when I'm ready." "That's fair," he said. And then after a moment, "Garrett's not... he's protective. It comes out sideways sometimes." "I've noticed," Harper said. She stood and picked up the primer. "I'm not asking you to take my side over his. I'm asking you to give me a little time before you let him decide things for you." Riker looked at his coffee cup. "He doesn't decide things for me." "Good," Harper said. "Then we're fine." She went to check on Charlotte, and if her chest was tighter than it had been an hour ago, that was her business. But Garrett was there for 4 days. In that time, he helped Riker with the barn roof, which needed 2 people, and he rode the perimeter fence with him and made a list of what else needed doing, and he was, by every observable measure, a useful and caring brother. He was also watching Harper constantly, with the patient attention of someone building a case. He did it carefully. He was not rude to her. She gave him credit for that, because he could have been, and he wasn't. He said please and thank you. He complimented the cooking once, briefly, in the way someone compliments a thing they'd rather not have to notice. He played with Daisy in the evenings and made Charlotte laugh with a funny noise he did with his mouth. And watching him with the children, Harper could see that he genuinely loved this family, which made everything harder. On the 3rd morning, she came out early to start the fire and found him already in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a cup of cold coffee that suggested he'd been there a while. They looked at each other. "You're still here," he said. "Every morning," she said, and went to build the fire. She could feel him watching her while she worked. The room was quiet enough that she could hear the fire catch. "I'm not trying to be your enemy," he said finally. "You have a funny way of being something else," she said. "I'm trying to protect my brother." "I know." She stood and dusted her hands. "That's the thing about what you're doing, Mr. Boone. It would be easier to be angry at it if I didn't understand it." He was quiet. "Whatever you heard in Laramie," Harper said, keeping her voice even and her back mostly to him. "I'm not going to tell you it's wrong. I'm going to tell you it's not the whole story, and that the whole story belongs to me, and that I'll tell Riker in my own time." She turned to face him. "What I will ask you is this. In the 10 days before you got here, when it was just me and your brother and those 2 girls, did you see any sign that I've done anything but work?" His jaw shifted. "No." "Did Charlotte look better or worse than when you last saw her?" A pause. "Better." "Did Daisy seem like a child someone was taking advantage of, or like a child someone was finally paying attention to?" He looked away. "I'm not asking you to like me," Harper said. "I'm asking you to look at the actual evidence in front of you instead of the story you decided on before you got here." Garrett turned his cup in his hands. He was a man who was not used to being argued with clearly, she could tell, not because he was arrogant, but because he was usually right, And being right for a long time does something to a person's relationship with being wrong. What happened in Laramie, he said quietly, wasn't small. No, she agreed. It wasn't. People got hurt. Yes, she said. They did. She let that sit. People being hurt doesn't always mean what it looks like from the outside. He looked at her. There was something in his face now that wasn't quite hostility, something more uncertain, which was both better and worse. I'm not going to pretend I'm easy with this, he said. You don't have to be easy with it, Harper said. Just don't take it from Riker's hands before he has a chance to decide for himself. Garrett left the following morning. He shook Riker's hand and kissed the top of Daisy's head, and looked at Charlotte for a long moment in her basket, and then he looked at Harper and said nothing, which was its own kind of something. After he'd ridden out, Riker stood in the yard for a moment watching the road. He'll come back, Harper said from the doorway. He always does, Riker said. He didn't sound unhappy about it. The town of Dellum Flats was not large enough to have genuine factions, but it had the social dynamics of a place that had been watching itself carefully for want of other entertainment. Harper went in with Riker for the first time on a Thursday, 3 weeks after she'd arrived, because he needed supplies and Charlotte needed to come along because of the feeding schedule. And it made more sense for Harper to come than not. She knew before they pulled up to the general store that it would not be uncomplicated. She'd been in enough small towns. The woman behind the counter at Mabry's General was named Doris Hatch, and she was perhaps 50, with a face that had started kind and gotten strategic over the years. She looked at Riker warmly, and then at Harper with an expression that traveled very quickly from surprise to assessment to something she was clearly working to keep off her face. Riker, she said, didn't know you were bringing company. Harper's been helping out at the ranch, Riker said, already looking at the shelves. I need a barrel of flour and more of that cured pork if you've got it. Helping out? Doris repeated, and then produced a smile that didn't quite reach the strategic part of her face. How nice. Harper looked at the jars of preserves on the counter and didn't respond. She was holding Charlotte, who was awake and interested in everything, turning her head from side to side in that alert way she'd recently developed. Is that the baby? Doris said, coming around the counter. Her voice had gone genuinely warm when she looked at Charlotte, which Harper noted. Not a bad woman, just a careful one. Charlotte, Harper said. She's 4 months. She looks well. Doris looked at Harper with something that was almost honest curiosity. You've been out there all this time. About 3 weeks. Just the two of you? And the children? Riker's been working the ranch, Harper said evenly. I've been managing the house. Doris processed this with visible effort. Well, she said finally, the house was... She stopped herself. In need of some attention, Harper said. Yes. Riker came back with his arms full of things to add to the list, and the conversation redirected toward commerce, and Harper stood with Charlotte and was looked at by everyone who came through the door that morning. Some of them nodded. Some of them didn't. One woman, younger, with a toddler on her hip, gave her a genuinely curious look, and then a small smile that surprised her. The woman's name, it turned out, was Nora Finch. She caught up with Harper outside the store while Riker was loading the wagon. I heard someone was helping Riker out, Nora said. She wasn't performing anything, not friendliness, not suspicion. She just seemed like someone who said what she meant. I'm glad. He was struggling. He was managing, Harper said. He was barely managing, Nora said, with a directness that was refreshing enough to be almost startling. Ellen was a good woman, and she kept a lot of that household running in ways he didn't see until she wasn't there anymore. She looked at Charlotte. She'd be glad the baby is thriving. Harper looked down at Charlotte. She's a good baby when she's not hungry. Aren't we all? Nora said, and then laughed a little at herself. I live about 4 miles east. My husband and Riker know each other. If you need anything or just need to talk to someone who isn't a man or a child, you know where to find me. Harper looked at her. Thank you, she said, and meant it in a way she hadn't expected to mean anything this morning. Nora nodded and went back to her wagon, and Harper watched her go and felt, for the first time since she'd arrived, something that wasn't strategic. Something that was just the small, ordinary feeling of not being entirely alone in a new place. It lasted until she turned around and saw the two men from the hardware store watching her from across the street with the particular ease of men who feel entitled to observe women at any volume they choose. And she heard one of them say something to the other that she didn't catch but didn't need to. She put Charlotte against her shoulder and went to help Riker with the wagon. The talk in town was worse than Riker let on, and she knew this because Daisy told her. Daisy had a habit of repeating things she'd heard without fully understanding their weight, not maliciously, but because she was 6 and information was information, and she didn't yet have the social architecture to know which things landed like stones. Tommy Hatch said his mama said you're a big fat lady who's after Papa's money, Daisy reported one afternoon. In the same tone she might report that the sky was a particular color. Harper was kneading bread. She kept kneading. Tommy Hatch is 7, she said, almost 8. Well, when he's 8, he might know that repeating his mama's words isn't always a good idea. Daisy considered this. Are you after Papa's money? Daisy, your papa doesn't have money. Oh. A pause. That's what I thought. Tommy's mama doesn't really know things. Some people don't, Harper said. It doesn't stop them from talking. Is it bad that they talk? Harper looked at the dough, at her hands in it, at the flour on the board. She thought about the careful, true answer. It's unpleasant, she said, but the way I figure it, people will say things regardless. What I do is still what I do, whether they're saying things about it or not. And what I do is here. So, she turned the dough. Daisy was quiet for a moment, then said, I told Tommy his mama was wrong. Harper looked at her. He said I was just saying that because you give me biscuits, Daisy said. Do I give you biscuits? Yes. Maybe he's right then, Harper said. Daisy's mouth twitched. She got the joke, which was something else that had happened in 3 weeks. Daisy had started getting jokes. It was a small thing that felt like a significant one. The ranch work was coming back. Not quickly. There was too much to do for quick, but steadily, the way a house comes back when someone is consistently paying attention to it. Riker had the east pasture sorted and had started on the south fence. He'd gotten the barn roof sealed before the next rain, which mattered because there was stock in there that couldn't afford a wet spell. He was sleeping better. Harper could tell not from anything he said, but from the change in his face, the way the flatness behind his eyes had started to fill back in. He wasn't a man who said much about himself, but he was a man who showed things if you were paying attention. And Harper had always been better at watching than at being watched. One evening, a month in, he came in from the south field in a better mood than usual. Something about a calf, something that had gone right when he'd expected it to go wrong. And he sat down at the table while she was finishing the dishes and just talked. About the ranch as it had been when he'd first got it, about the plans he and Ellen had made for it, about the kinds of things he'd imagined building. She listened without filling the pauses, which was harder than it sounded. You think it's still possible? He asked her at one point. What I'm describing. I think ranches have come back from worse, she said. I think the bones here are good. The soil, the pasture, the layout. What's been missing is time, and now you've got a little more of it. Because of you, he said, not with anything in his voice except the plain fact of it. Because you fixed the fence, she said, and the barn, and the south pasture. I just made sure Charlotte was fed so you could do those things. Harper. Riker. He looked at her across the table. He had a way of looking at her sometimes that was different from the way he looked at other things. More direct, without the habitual practicality behind it, just a person looking at another person, and whatever that meant. She held the look for a moment and then went back to the dishes. Garrett's going to come back, he said. I know. He's going to want to tell me whatever it is he knows. Yes, she said. He will. I'm going to ask you something. She waited. Whatever it is, and I'm not asking you to tell me yet, I'm saying whatever it is. Will it change what I've seen with my own eyes? In this house, with my daughters? She thought about it honestly, the way the question deserved. No, she said. What happened before doesn't change what's happened here. Then that's what I'll remember, he said, when he tells me. She turned back to the dishes. Her throat felt strange. She focused on the water, on the cup in her hand, on the ordinary mechanics of the moment. You might feel differently when you hear it, she said. Maybe, he said. But I'm telling you how I intend to feel. Outside, the wind had picked up. She could hear it in the gaps around the doorframe, a sound she'd come to associate with this place. That particular Wyoming wind, persistent and cold and somehow not unfriendly when you were on the inside of it. Charlotte made a small sound in her basket. Harper dried the last dish and put it on the shelf and thought about what it felt like to have someone say that to her. To say, I'm telling you how I intend to feel. As if her past were something that could be decided about rather than handed down. She thought about the other 6 doors, the Hargrove place, and the others before it, the week of being assessed and found wanting before she'd even opened her mouth. She looked at the room, the clean shelf, the mended curtain, Charlotte's basket, the primer on the table, the fire that was going to last through the night because she'd laid it right. She had done this. Whatever else she was, whatever Laramie meant, she had done this. Garrett Boone could come back whenever he wanted. He could say whatever he had to say. She'd be here when he did. He came back on a Tuesday, and this time he wasn't alone. She saw the horses from the kitchen window. 2 of them, Garrett's and another she didn't recognize. A woman on the second horse, well-dressed for a ranch visit, which meant she'd dressed for it deliberately. Late 30s or well-maintained 40s, with the kind of posture that said money without having to announce it. She came in behind Garrett with the easy comfort of someone who'd been in this house before, who knew where the furniture was and which chair was better, and how to speak to Daisy in the particular tone that suggested she'd been spoken to before. "Margaret Hale," Riker said, introducing her to Harper with a neutrality in his voice that told her he'd been told to do this by someone. "She's a neighbor. Her husband was a friend of my father's." Margaret Hale looked at Harper with the kind of careful, thorough look that could have passed for politeness if you didn't know what it was. Then she smiled. "I've heard so much about you," she said. "I imagined so," Harper said. They sat down to coffee, all of them, and Harper poured and served and watched the room, and she understood within about 4 minutes what this visit was. Margaret Hale was everything Harper was not. Slight, polished, widowed with her own land, already known to the family, already woven into the fabric of things. She spoke to Riker warmly and to the children with practiced ease, and she asked careful, friendly questions about the ranch that demonstrated she already knew the answers. Garrett had brought her as an alternative, not cruelly. Harper could see that too. He thought he was helping. He thought this was the cleaner solution to a problem he'd identified, the solution that didn't come with whatever baggage he thought Harper was carrying from Laramie. Daisy came and sat beside Harper at the table instead of across it, which was a small thing and not a small thing. Charlotte, being 4 months old and without social tact, began to cry in the middle of Margaret Hale's careful discussion of spring weather, and Harper picked her up and settled her, and the crying stopped. And Margaret watched this with an expression that she mostly managed. "She settled well," Margaret said. "She has," Harper agreed. "Babies need routine," Margaret said pleasantly. "They do," Harper said. There was a pause in which several things went unsaid. Riker was looking at Harper, not at Margaret. Harper kept her eyes on Charlotte. After the visit, when the horses had gone down the road and the dust had settled, Riker stood on the porch for a moment. Harper came to stand in the doorway. "That was deliberate," she said. "Yes," he said. "What do you think of her?" He considered. "She's a capable woman. Her ranch is well run. She's known the family a long time." "And?" Harper said. "And Daisy sat next to you the entire time." Harper said nothing. "Daisy doesn't do that," Riker said. "She doesn't sit next to people. She watches from across the room until she decides." He paused. "She's decided." The wind came up again from the west, carrying the smell of rain somewhere far off. "Whatever Garrett thinks he's arranging," Riker said quietly, "it's not his to arrange." Harper looked out at the road where the dust was still settling. "Laramie," she said, "when I'm ready." "When you're ready," he said. She went inside. Behind her, she heard him stay on the porch for a while longer, just standing there in the wind, in the ordinary mess of figuring out what he wanted. And that, somehow, was the most human thing she had seen from him yet. The rain came on a Wednesday. Harper had felt it building for 2 days before it arrived, not from any particular skill, but from the way the air had started carrying itself differently, heavy and close, the way Wyoming air got when the sky was loading up for something serious. The horses had been restless. The calf in the south barn had been off its feed. Small things, the kind a person noticed if they'd been paying attention to a place long enough. She mentioned it to Riker Tuesday evening. "Storm coming," she said. "Maybe tomorrow." He looked at the sky through the kitchen window. It was still clear, still that particular high-altitude blue that made Wyoming look like a painting of itself. "Maybe," he said. "I want to move the extra firewood under the eave before it comes." "I'll do it in the morning." "I'll start tonight," she said. "There's still light." He opened his mouth to argue, and then looked at her face and didn't. He had learned, in the 6 weeks she'd been there, that certain things were not arguments so much as announcements. This was one of them. She moved the firewood that evening, armload by armload, stacking it correctly under the south eave, where the overhang was deepest. It took 40 minutes, and her back was unhappy about the last 10, but the wood was dry and the stack was solid, and when the rain did come, it would come to a house that was ready for it. The storm arrived Wednesday afternoon. It didn't announce itself gradually, the way storms sometimes did, coming in slow across the horizon with visible curtains of rain that gave you time to do something. It came sideways and fast, the way Wyoming storms came when they had decided on something, and by the time Harper had gotten the windows shuttered on the west side, the yard was already standing water, and the sound of it on the roof was loud enough that you had to raise your voice inside. Daisy was at the table with her primer, trying to concentrate and failing. The noise kept pulling her attention upward, the child's instinct to look at the ceiling when a sound came from above. "It's just rain," Harper said. "Keep reading." "It's loud rain." "Wyoming rain. Keep reading." Charlotte was awake in her basket, not crying but watchful, her dark eyes moving with each new sound. Harper checked her temperature out of habit, forehead with the back of her hand the way she'd learned to do it, and went back to the stove. Riker came in from the barn at 4, soaked through despite the oilskin, and stood in the doorway, dripping. "How's the south barn?" "Holding," he said, pulling off the oilskin. "Roof joint's stressed, but it'll hold. The creek's rising." He looked at the window. "This is a real one." "I know," Harper said. "Sit down. I'll get you something hot." He sat. He was tired in the way people got tired in bad weather. Not from the work, which was hard enough, but from the weight of it, the relentlessness of weather that didn't care what you had planned. He ate the soup she put in front of him and then said, "I'm going to need to check on the Harmon fence line tomorrow if it eases up. If the creek rises enough, it'll push through at the low corner and we'll lose the whole boundary argument." "One thing at a time," Harper said. "That's easy to say." "It's easy to say because it's true. Tonight the barn is holding and the wood is dry and everybody's inside. Tomorrow you deal with the fence." He looked at her with that expression she'd seen before, the one that meant she'd said something he'd needed to hear and was mildly irritated at needing to hear it. "You moved all that firewood yourself," he said. "Most of it. I could have—" "You were fixing the barn joint, which mattered more." She poured him coffee. "You're not supposed to be everywhere, Riker. That's why there are 2 of us." He wrapped both hands around the cup. Outside, the rain hammered the roof and the window glass and the wood of the porch steps, and inside the fire was going and the soup was hot, and for a moment the division between outside and in felt like something worth having. Then Charlotte made a sound that wasn't her normal sound. Harper heard it before it was anything definite. Just a quality to it, a flatness, something slightly off. She was at the basket in 4 steps and had her hand on the baby's forehead before she'd consciously decided to do it. The warmth under her hand was wrong. Not the soft warmth of a sleeping baby, but something drier, more urgent. "She's warm," Harper said. Riker was up immediately. He came to the basket and she moved aside and he put his hand where hers had been and his face changed. "How warm?" he said. "Too warm." She kept her voice level. "When did you last check her?" "Before I went to the barn. She was fine." "These things can move fast." She picked Charlotte up, holding her against her chest, and the baby was heavy in a way that alarmed her, not struggling, just present and still and hot. "How far to the doctor?" "Caldwell's in Delham Flats, 8 miles. Harper looked at the window. The rain was still going, still hard, the sky outside the color of an old bruise. "You need to go," she said. Riker stared at her. "It's dark in an hour. The road's going to be—" "I know what the road's going to be," Harper said. "You need to go anyway. A fever like this on a baby this young doesn't wait for the weather to cooperate. He was already moving toward the door, reaching for the oilskin he'd just taken off. "I'll be back as fast as I can," he said. "I know." She shifted Charlotte higher. "Be careful on the creek crossing. If it's over the marker rocks, don't cross. And if it is, then you go around by the Finch property. It adds an hour, but it's solid ground." She looked at him. "Riker, go. We'll be all right." He looked at her holding his daughter, this woman he'd let through his gate 6 weeks ago because he'd heard a baby crying, and something moved across his face that she didn't let herself name. "I'll be back," he said, and went. Harper listened to the horse leave, its hooves loud and then muffled by the rain, and then she listened to the rain, and then she was alone with Daisy and Charlotte and the storm. Daisy was quiet in this way she went quiet when she was scared. Not upset, not crying, just very still, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes on Harper. "She's going to be all right," Harper said, which she believed and didn't entirely believe in the way that honest people don't entirely believe things when they don't have enough information. "Is it bad?" Daisy asked. "It's serious. Fevers in young babies can be serious. That's why your papa went to get Dr. Caldwell." She shifted Charlotte in her arms. "I need you to help me." Daisy straightened. She was a child who became more capable when given a job. "I need you to get me the cloth from the shelf by the basin. The white ones, not the kitchen cloths. And I need the basin filled with cool water, not cold cool. You know the difference?" "Yes." "Good. Go." Daisy went. Harper walked the room slowly, keeping the baby moving, because motion was better than stillness and warmth was better than cold air, and her arms were better than the basket right now. Charlotte was awake, and that was something. Her eyes were moving, tracking Harper's face when it came close, and that responsiveness was something to hold on to. "You stay with me," Harper said softly to the baby. "Your papa's coming back. You stay with me until he does." She began the work of managing a fever without a doctor present, which was not complicated but required consistency. Cool cloths on the forehead, on the back of the neck, changed frequently. Small amounts of water if the baby would take them. Keeping the room at the right temperature. Not cold, not hot. The particular in-between that was harder to maintain than either extreme. Watching for the signs that things were getting worse, which she knew what to look for and tried not to think about. Daisy came back with the cloths and the basin and stationed herself beside Harper without being asked, and handed cloths over when they needed changing, quietly and competently, her small face concentrated and serious. "You're doing well," Harper told her. "Is this what it was like when Mama was sick?" Daisy asked. Harper looked at her. "I wasn't there for that," she said carefully. "I was," Daisy said. "Papa sat with her all night. He held her hand." She paused. "I watched from the doorway." Harper had nothing useful to say about that, so she said, "Your mama would be glad you're helping right now." Daisy considered this and seemed to accept it, and reached for the next cloth. The hours passed. The rain didn't ease. Harper walked and sat and changed cloths and watched Charlotte's face for anything that would tell her which direction this was going. And the direction stayed unclear, which was not good, but was not the worst. The fever wasn't dropping, but it wasn't spiking either, holding at its terrible elevated level like something not yet decided. Around what she estimated was 9 o'clock, she heard horses. She thought it was Riker, and her whole body reorganized around that possibility. And then she heard 2 sets of hooves and voices in the yard, and a knock at the door that was too sharp and too quick, and she opened it, and it was Garrett. He was soaked. He had another man with him she didn't recognize, a ranch hand apparently, both of them dripping on the porch. "I was riding in from the east and passed Riker on the road," Garrett said without preamble. "He told me about Charlotte. I rode back." He looked at her with an expression that was stripped of its usual composure. None of the careful watchfulness he'd maintained since the first day. Just a man who was scared about his brother's baby. Harper stepped back from the door. "Come in," she said. "She's stable, but the fever hasn't broken." He came in and went directly to where Charlotte was, in the nest of blankets Harper had made on the chair, and he leaned over her and looked at her with such naked worry that Harper looked away to give him something. "She's responsive," Harper said. "She knows where she is. That's good." "You've been managing this alone?" he said. "Daisy's been helping." He looked at Daisy, who was standing by the basin with a damp cloth folded over her arm, in a way that was almost professionally competent. Something shifted in his face. "What do you need?" he asked Harper. "Fresh water from the well. The basin's getting warm, and if you can keep the fire consistent, not too high, that would help." He nodded and went to do it, and the night reorganized around this new shape. Garrett at the fire, Daisy with the cloths, Harper walking the floor with Charlotte in her arms, and the rain still going on the roof, and Riker somewhere on that road in the dark, trying to get back. It was close to midnight when Garrett came to stand beside her. She was sitting in the chair now, Charlotte against her chest, one hand on the baby's back, feeling for the rhythm of breathing. The fever had gone up in the last hour, and she was managing what she felt about that very carefully, the way you managed a load you couldn't afford to drop. Garrett pulled the other chair close and sat. For a while, neither of them said anything. The fire had steadied, and the room was the right temperature, and Daisy had finally fallen asleep on the floor with the rag doll, which Harper had let happen because there was no useful place to put her, and a sleeping child was easier than a frightened, awake one. "I owe you something," Garrett said eventually. Harper looked at him. "Not an apology yet," he said honestly. "I'm not sure I'm wrong enough for that, but I owe you. I don't know. Credit, maybe." "You don't owe me anything," Harper said. "You were worried about your brother." "I was." He paused. "I'm also still worried about what I know from Laramie." "I know you are." "But it's—" He stopped, looked at Charlotte, at the cloths, at Daisy on the floor. "Whatever happened there, it's not what's happening here." "No," Harper said. "It's not. What happened there?" He turned his hat in his hands. "I only know one version of it." "That's usually how it starts," Harper said. "One version." He looked at her. "You want to tell me the other one?" She thought about it, about this man, this particular night, this specific moment of exhaustion and fear that had stripped away the careful positioning they'd been doing for weeks. "Not tonight," she said. "Tonight I'm keeping this baby's fever from getting worse, and that's what I have available." She shifted Charlotte gently, "But I'll tell Riker, and if he wants to share it with you after, that's his choice." Garrett nodded slowly. He seemed to accept this. "She took to you fast," he said. "Charlotte, she was colicky when I saw her last. Cried every time someone she didn't know picked her up." "She knows me now," Harper said simply. "Yes," he said. "She does." Outside, a gust hit the house hard enough to creak the frame, a sound like the whole structure inhaling, and then it passed and the rain continued steady underneath it. "What's Laramie?" Garrett said. Not demanding, just asking. Harper was quiet for a moment. "I was married," she said, briefly, to a man named Cal Ferris. Garrett's expression shifted. "You know the name," she said. "I know it," he said. "Then you know some of what happened. Cal had debts. Large ones, to men who collected debts in particular ways. I didn't know about them when I married him. I knew he had money trouble. I thought it was the ordinary kind." She looked at Charlotte's face. "It wasn't ordinary. He borrowed against property he didn't own and made agreements he couldn't keep, and when it all came apart, I was in the house when it happened." "People said you knew," Garrett said quietly. "That you were part of it. People said a lot of things." She kept her voice level. "I wasn't part of it. I was a woman married to a man I didn't know well enough, which is a different thing, though some people find it convenient not to notice the difference." She paused. "Cal is dead. He died 6 months before I came here. What he left behind him was a name I'd had for 2 years and a reputation built on his choices." "You could have changed your name," Garrett said. "I did," she said. "Calloway was my grandmother's name. It's my name now." She looked at him. "Changing your name doesn't change what people remember in the places where they remember it. It just gives you somewhere else to start over." He was quiet for a long time. "That's what Delham Flats is," he said finally. Not a question. "That's what every place is," Harper said. "You start over until you find somewhere worth staying." Garrett looked at the fire. "I went to Laramie 6 months ago," he said. "On business. Someone recognized your description and mentioned it. I didn't have the details, just the name, the association, the general shape of the trouble." He paused. "I should have gotten the details." "Yes," Harper said. You should have. That's the apology, he said. In case it wasn't clear. She looked at him. It's clear, she said. The doctor arrived at 2 in the morning. Dr. Caldwell was a small man in his 60s with the unhurried manner of someone who had seen enough emergencies to have developed a different relationship with urgency than most people. He came in behind Riker, who was soaked through again despite having dried off once, and he went straight to Charlotte without removing his coat. Riker came directly to Harper. How long? He said. His voice was rough. Fever came up around 4. I've been managing it. It hasn't broken, but it hasn't spiked in the last 2 hours. She looked at him. At his wet face, his exhausted eyes, the dirt on his hands from a fall she suspected he'd had on the road and hadn't mentioned. Are you hurt? No, did she? She's been responsive the whole time. Watch her eyes when you get close. He went to the doctor, who was examining Charlotte with efficient, practiced hands. Harper stayed where she was because there were too many people near the baby already, and what Charlotte needed was calm. Garrett appeared beside her. He made good time, Garrett said quietly, meaning Riker. Yes, Harper said. She could picture it. Riker on that road in the dark, in the storm, pushing the horse as fast as he could justify. He would have ridden through anything, Garrett said. He paused. He'll ride through anything for things he cares about. He's always been like that. She understood the observation was not entirely about the road. The doctor worked for 20 minutes, and then he straightened and spoke to Riker in a low voice, and Riker's shoulders dropped in a way that meant something good. Harper let herself breathe. Fever's high but manageable, Caldwell said, louder now, to the room. You've been doing the right things. He looked at Harper. You managed this? And Daisy, Harper said. She was a good helper. Caldwell looked at Daisy asleep on the floor with the rag doll and made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. I'll leave you medicine, he said to Riker. Keep doing what she's been doing. Cool cloths, room temperature steady. I want the fever down by morning. If it goes higher before it goes lower, send for me again. He glanced out the window at the rain, if that's possible. It'll ease up by morning, Riker said. Your whole county's an optimist, Caldwell said dryly, and went to put his coat back on. Riker walked him out and Harper stayed with Charlotte, who was in the nest of blankets now, and put the back of her hand on the baby's forehead and found it the same as before. Too warm, but the same, which was what they had to work with. She was tired. Properly tired. The kind that lived in the bones rather than the muscles. The kind that came from a night of sustained attention to something that mattered too much to let slip. When Riker came back in, he looked at her with an expression she didn't know how to classify. Not gratitude exactly, though gratitude was in there. Something more than gratitude. Something without a clean name. You should sleep, he said. When the fever breaks, she said. Harper. When the fever breaks, she said again, gently. Then I'll sleep. He looked at her for a moment. Then he pulled the second chair up beside hers in the spot where Garrett had been sitting and sat down. Then I'll sit up with you, he said. She looked at him. Don't argue, he said. You've argued enough tonight. I didn't argue. You told me to go to the doctor in a storm. You told Garrett to get water. You told Daisy what cloths to use. He looked at the fire. You managed everything. Let me sit with you. She let him sit with her. Garrett took Charlotte for a shift around 3 in the morning, carrying her with the careful confidence of a man who had done this before. And Riker and Harper sat side by side in the quiet of the late-night house, with the rain finally beginning to ease on the roof, coming down softer now, the storm tiring itself out. Laramie, Harper said. He turned to look at her. You don't have to... I know I don't, she said. But you stayed up with me, so... She looked at the fire. I was married before. To a man named Cal Ferris. He was in debt in ways I didn't understand until it was too late, and when it fell apart, people decided I was part of it. I wasn't, but I had his name and his house and his neighbors, and that was enough for people to decide. She told him the rest of it. The version she'd told Garrett, but fuller. The part she'd been carrying around in the bag alongside Opal Trent's letter of reference. Cal's borrowed money. The men who came to collect it. The night the house had been the wrong place to be. How she'd walked out of Laramie with what she could carry and kept moving because moving was the only thing she knew how to do. Riker listened without interrupting. He had that quality. The ability to sit inside a difficult story without trying to fix it or fill it or redirect it towards something easier. He just listened. When she finished, he was quiet for a while. "You've been waiting for me to find out," he said. "Since before Garrett got here," she said. "Were you afraid of what I'd do?" She thought about it honestly. "I was afraid of losing this," she said. Not any particular thing. Just this. The house. The girls." She paused. "I've been in enough places that didn't keep me long." "This one will," Riker said. She looked at him. "That's not a guarantee I can make perfectly," he said, with the directness she'd come to depend on from him. "I know that, but it's what I intend." The fire had gotten low. Neither of them moved to build it up. The rain was down to a whisper now. The tail end of the storm, the sky outside the window going from black to the first deep purple of very early morning. And then Garrett said, from the other side of the room, "She's cooler." Both of them were up immediately. Charlotte was asleep, a real sleep. Not the fever-heavy stillness of the last hours, but something smoother and deeper. And Garrett had his hand on her forehead with a look on his face that was relief so complete it had erased everything else. Harper reached over and felt for herself. The fever had broken. She stood there with her hand on Charlotte's head and felt the ordinary temperature of a sleeping baby, and the feeling that moved through her wasn't joy exactly. It was the specific feeling of something you'd been holding very carefully finally being put down safely, the way you felt after carrying something across a long distance without dropping it. Riker put his hand on top of hers. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. Behind them, Daisy slept on with the rag doll, having missed the whole last hour of it, which was fine. There would be things to tell her in the morning. There would be a story to tell, but how Charlotte got sick and the storm came and everyone stayed up and it was hard, and then it got better. And Daisy would need to hear it, and Harper would tell it to her straight, because Daisy was a child who could handle straight, who had been handling straight for a long time. Through the window, the sky had gone from purple to the gray-blue of a very early dawn, the particular color that meant the night was over, even if the day wasn't quite ready yet. Charlotte breathed steadily. The fire was low. The storm was done. Harper took her hand back from under Riker's, but slowly, the way you removed your hand from a warm thing you didn't entirely want to leave, and she went to build the fire up for morning. The morning after the storm had the particular quality of mornings that follow hard things. Cleaned out, a little raw, the world looking like it had been wrung and hung to dry. The yard was standing water in the low spots, and the creek was still running high enough to be heard from the house, a sound like sustained argument from somewhere beyond the south tree line. Harper had slept 3 hours. She knew this because she'd counted approximately the way a person counts sleep when they don't quite trust it. Waking once when Charlotte made a sound, again when Daisy came looking for breakfast earlier than usual, and a third time for no reason except that her body had apparently decided 3 hours was sufficient and had opinions about continuing. She got up and built the fire and started coffee and stood in the kitchen in the gray early light and felt the specific texture of exhaustion that had nothing to do with weakness, just a body that had worked hard and was reporting in. Garrett was asleep in the barn. Riker had gone out at first light to check the creek and the south fence, which was either practical necessity or the particular way some men processed difficult nights, by going outside and doing something physical and immediate. She'd seen it before. She understood it. Charlotte was still sleeping, her breathing steady and soft, the fever gone without returning. Harper had checked her twice in the night and twice this morning, and each time she found nothing but a sleeping baby and felt the same relief, not diminishing with repetition, just changing its quality, settling from sharp to something more like gratitude. Daisy appeared in the kitchen doorway with her hair uncombed and the rag doll under her arm. "Is she better?" she said. First thing, before good morning, before anything. "Much better," Harper said. "Come here." Daisy came and Harper crouched down to her level, which was something she did when she needed Daisy to know she was being spoken to directly and not around. "You did well last night," she said. "The cloths, the water, staying awake as long as you did. That was good work." Daisy absorbed this with her characteristic gravity. "I was scared," she said. "I know. You did the work anyway. That's the part that counts." "Were you scared?" Harper looked at her. "Yes," she said. Daisy seemed to find this satisfying in a way that a lie would not have been. She went to the shelf for her cup, and Harper stood back up and the morning began in its ordinary way, which felt like a gift after the night they'd had. Oh. Garrett came in from the barn mid-morning when the coffee was still going and Harper was making bread, because bread was what she made when she needed her hands occupied. He came in without his usual composed posture, just a man who'd slept in a barn after a hard night, slightly stiff, slightly rumpled, with none of the careful arrangement he typically brought to a room. He poured himself coffee without asking. She'd noted that he'd stopped asking, which was its own small indication of something. "How is she?" he said. "Sleeping. Fever's gone." He exhaled. "Good." He sat down, wrapped his hands around the cup. "Riker outside?" "South fence." "I'll go help him." "Let him finish," Harper said, not looking up from the bread. "He needs an hour with something uncomplicated." Garrett was quiet. Then, "You know him pretty well." "I know what I've seen," she said. He turned his cup. The kitchen was warm from the oven and outside the yard was still wet, the puddles reflecting a sky that couldn't decide between gray and blue. "What I said to you," Garrett said. "The first morning. In here before breakfast." Harper kept working the dough. "I told you that you were the wrong woman for this family," he said. He said it plainly, without dressing it up, which she respected. "I want to be honest that I said it, because I find it harder to stand behind now than I did then, and it seems important to acknowledge the distance between those two places." She turned the dough. "You were trying to protect Riker. I was making a decision about what was best for my brother based on half a story and a description someone gave me in a town I passed through." He paused. "That's not protecting someone. That's something easier than protecting someone, dressed up to look like it." Harper looked at him then. He met it. "The night Riker's wife died," Garrett said. "I was 3 counties away. I didn't get here in time. I've been trying to make up for that ever since, I think, without being honest that that's what I was doing." He looked at his cup. "Riker didn't need me to pick the right woman for him. He needed me to trust that he could figure that out himself." The bread went into the pan. Harper wiped her hands on the cloth. "He's a grown man," she said, "with good judgment." "Better than mine, apparently," Garrett said, not self-pityingly, just as a fact he was getting comfortable with. "You're not a bad man," Harper said. "You're a man who made a decision fast and then had to live with it longer than was comfortable." He looked at her. "You're being generous." "I'm being accurate," she said. "There's a difference." The town of Delham Flats found out about the fever the way small towns found out about everything, by accumulation, one person's account layering over another's until a story emerged that was somewhere between what had happened and what people needed to believe had happened. What they knew. Riker Boone had ridden through a storm to get the doctor. The baby had been sick. The woman at the ranch, the one people had opinions about, had kept the child alive through the night. What they added, various things, depending on who was doing the adding. Nora Finch came by Thursday, 2 days after the storm, with a jar of preserves and the straightforward manner Harper had liked from the start. "I heard Charlotte was sick," she said on the porch. "I would have come sooner, but the road past my east field washed out." "She's fine now," Harper said. "Come in." Nora came in and looked at Charlotte in her basket and satisfied herself. And then she sat at the table and said, "The whole town is talking about it, you know." "About Charlotte." "About you," Nora said. "About what you did." "I kept cool cloths on a baby's head," Harper said. "That's not a story." "In a storm, alone, while Riker rode 8 miles in the dark," Nora said. "It's a story." She paused. "And Doris Hatch is not telling it kindly." Harper said nothing. "She's saying you weren't alone," Nora said. "That Garrett was there, and that it raises questions about what kind of household you're running out here." The particular kind of ugliness that was, Harper recognized immediately. It had nothing to do with the truth of that night, Garrett arriving to help, a man worried about a sick child, and everything to do with the kind of story that got built around women who didn't fit where people thought they should. "People will say things," Harper said. "People will say things," Nora agreed. "I'm telling you so you're not surprised when you hear it from someone less friendly." She looked at Harper directly. "I don't think it's true. I also think you know that my thinking it isn't true doesn't stop it from doing damage." "I know," Harper said. "Riker should know. If he doesn't, he will." Nora nodded. She looked around the kitchen, at the ordered shelves, the primer on the table, the repaired curtain. with the eyes of someone who could read what a house said about who lived in it. "Whatever Doris says," Nora said, "you've done good work here. Anyone with eyes can see it." "Thank you," Harper said. "I'm not saying it to be kind," Nora said. "I'm saying it because it's a fact, and facts seem to be in short supply right now." She told Riker that evening. He listened with his jaw set in the way it set when he was controlling a reaction, and when she finished, he was quiet for long enough that she wondered if he was going to say something she didn't want to hear. "Doris Hatch," he said finally. "Among others, likely. She's not alone." "She's wrong," he said. "Yes," Harper said. "She is. That doesn't necessarily—" "She's wrong," he said again, with a flatness that closed the subject. "Garrett came back in a storm because his niece was sick. Anyone who turns that into something dirty is telling you more about themselves than about anything else." He looked at her. "Does it worry you, what she's saying?" Harper considered the honest answer. "It worries me what it could cost you," she said. "Socially, commercially. You have to do business in that town." "I've been doing business in that town for 3 years," Riker said. "They know what kind of man I am. They know what kind of man you were before a strange woman moved into your house." He looked at her steadily. "Nothing that happened in this house is what Doris Hatch is suggesting." "No," Harper said. "It's not. But that's sometimes beside the point." He got up from the table and went to the window and stood there for a moment looking out at the yard in the early evening light. The creek had come back down. The south pasture was soaked but intact. Things were returning to what they'd been before, with the adjustments that hard events always left behind. "I'm going into town tomorrow," he said. "Riker, I'm going to pick up supplies and have a conversation with Harmon about the fence line, which I've been meaning to do for a week." He turned from the window. "And if Doris Hatch has something to say, she can say it to my face. I'd rather know what I'm dealing with than have it build up where I can't see it." She looked at him. He had that particular quality right now. The one that wasn't stubbornness, exactly, but something more like a clear decision that had been made and didn't need revisiting. "All right," she said. "You should come," he said. "Into town." "Into town?" He held her gaze. "I'm not going to pretend there's nothing to address, but I'm also not going to leave you here while I go address it, because that's not the arrangement I'm interested in having." She understood what he was saying. Not just about the trip into town, but about what kind of arrangement he meant. The one where she was the problem to be managed in private, and not the person who came with him when things needed facing. "All right," she said again. They went in the next morning, the 4 of them. Riker and Harper in the front of the wagon, Daisy in the back with Charlotte in her arms, which she was now trusted to do for short periods and took very seriously. The road had dried enough to be passable. The mud firmed up by 2 days of decent sun, and the morning was the kind of clear that came after storms, scrubbed and direct. The main street of Delham Flats was doing its usual business. A few wagons, a few horses at the rail, people moving between the storefronts with the purposeful air of people who have errands and don't want to waste time on anything beyond them. They pulled up at Mabry's. Harper climbed down and took Charlotte from Daisy so Riker could tie the horse, and she stood in the street with the baby on her hip and the town around her and felt the particular sensation of being looked at by people who think they're being subtle about it. She'd felt it before. She'd felt it in every new town, for different reasons, but always the same quality of it. That awareness of being assessed by people who had already made up their minds. She'd spent most of her adult life trying to manage it, shrink herself around it, move through it quietly enough that it wouldn't have anything to grab onto. She stood straight. She wasn't going to manage around it today. They went into Mabry's. Doris Hatch was behind the counter, as she generally was, and she looked at Riker with her usual warmth and at Harper with her usual careful neutrality, and then she looked at Charlotte on Harper's hip, and something complicated moved across her face. "Morning, Riker," she said. "Doris?" He was already at the shelves. "I need that order I put in last week, and I need to add another 50 pounds of flour." "Of course." She reached for the ledger. Her eyes went to Harper again. "I heard the baby was sick." "She was," Riker said without turning. "Harper managed through the night until I got back with Caldwell." A beat. "That must have been frightening," Doris said. She was looking at Harper now, and her voice had something in it that might have been genuine. "Being alone with a sick child like that." "I had Daisy," Harper said. and Garrett came by to help. It was a long night, but we managed. She said it plainly, not as a correction, not as a confrontation, just as the accurate version of events stated in a room where the inaccurate version had been circulating. Doris looked at her for a moment. Something shifted in her expression, not all the way to warm, but away from cool. The tiny acknowledgement of a woman who has maybe said something that didn't hold up to the actual story. "Well," Doris said, "I'm glad she's all right." "So are we," Harper said. Riker came back to the counter with his list, and they did the business of the morning without further incident. But Harper noticed, because she noticed most things, that Doris's careful neutrality had changed its quality. Still careful, but less like a weapon being held in reserve and more like a person who was revising something and hadn't quite finished. It wasn't absolution. It wasn't a town turning around because of one counter interaction. But it was a thread being pulled, and sometimes that was how it started. Outside at the wagon, Nora Finch appeared from across the street. "I saw you come in," she said, to both of them. "Riker, Tom says he can spare a man next week for that corner fence post if you still need it." "Tell him I'd appreciate it," Riker said. Nora looked at Harper with a small expression that communicated something without specifying it. Acknowledgement, something close to solidarity, the particular language that women used with each other in places where the official language left too much out. Harper nodded once. It was on the way home that Daisy said from the back of the wagon, "Tommy Hatch said his mama was wrong." Riker and Harper both turned. "When did he say that?" Harper said. "This morning, before we left. He came to the fence." Daisy was matter-of-fact about it, bouncing gently with the wagon's movement, Charlotte asleep in her lap. "He said his mama told him she might have had the wrong idea about you and that he shouldn't have repeated what she said to me before." Riker glanced at Harper. "That was big of her," Harper said carefully. "Tommy said she felt bad," Daisy said. "He said she cried a little." A silence. "Well," Harper said, "people feel bad when they realize they've been unkind. That's how they're supposed to feel." "Does it make it better?" Daisy said. "When they feel bad?" Harper thought about this honestly because Daisy was asking a real question. "It helps," she said. "It's not the same as it not happening, but it helps." Daisy seemed to file this away with all the other things she was filing away. This particular 6-year-old who was building a picture of how the world worked from whatever it handed her. Harper hoped the picture she was getting was mostly accurate. She hoped she was one of the accurate parts of it. The ranch came into view around the long curve, and she saw it the way she sometimes still saw it, as if for the first time, though it was deeply familiar now. The repaired fence, the cleared garden, the barn with its sealed roof joint, the house with its mended curtain visible through the window from the road. She had done some of that. Riker had done some. Together, they had done most of it. Garrett left on Friday. He came to find Harper before he went, which she hadn't quite expected. She was in the garden, the first truly warm day since the storm, the kind of day that made the soil cooperative. And he came around the corner of the house and stood at the garden fence the way Daisy used to stand there before she'd decided Harper was safe to be near. "I'm heading out this morning," he said. "I know," Riker said. "I'll be back in a month or so." He paused. "I wanted to say, I told Riker last night that I was wrong about you. Not just about the Laramie thing, about the whole of it." She straightened from the carrot row. "What did he say?" Garrett almost smiled. "He said he knew." She looked at the garden for a moment, the cleared beds, the things coming up that had been fighting through weeds when she'd arrived. "He's a good man," she said. "He is," Garrett said. "He's better since you've been here. I want you to know I see that." "He was already good," Harper said. "He was just tired." "You're not going to take any credit, are you?" "I'm going to take credit for the carrot row," she said. "I worked hard on the carrot row." Garrett looked at the garden. Something in him had eased. Not completely. Not the way things eased in stories where people transformed overnight and emerged uncomplicated. He was still Garrett, still cautious, still the kind of man who moved carefully around things he couldn't control. But the careful watchfulness he'd brought to every room for the past weeks was different now, pointed in a different direction. "Harper," he said. She looked up. "I'm sorry for what I said to you that first morning, about being the wrong woman." He said it without qualification. That was mine to say or not say, and I shouldn't have said it. She looked at him for a moment. At his face, the Boone jaw, the same dark hair as Riker, the eyes that had looked at her with suspicion and were now doing something else entirely. "Thank you," she said, and meant it plainly, without reservation. He nodded, touched his hat, went to saddle his horse. She went back to the carrot row. It was a Sunday afternoon, 2 weeks after the storm, that Riker finally said the thing he'd been working his way toward. Daisy was napping. Charlotte was in her basket. The afternoon had the slow, golden quality of late summer on the frontier, the light coming through the window at the angle that made everything look slightly more valuable than it was, and Riker was at the table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold because he'd been sitting with it for 40 minutes without drinking it. Harper was mending. She'd noticed the coffee situation but said nothing about it. "I need to ask you something," Riker said. She looked up. "It's going to come out clumsy," he said. "I'm telling you in advance because I don't have the right words for it, and I'd rather you know that than think I haven't thought about it." "All right," she said. He looked at the cup. "You've been here 2 months. About that. And in that time," he stopped, started again. "This house has been different. The girls have been different. I've been different. And I know some of that is just time and things settling after Ellen, but not all of it is that." He looked up at her. "Most of it is you." Harper kept her hand still in her lap. "I don't want you to stay because I'm paying you," he said. "I want you to stay because I want you to stay as part of this." He made a gesture that encompassed the kitchen, the house, the window, and what was outside it. All of it. She understood what he was asking. She wasn't going to make him say it more precisely than he had the words for. "Riker," she said, I know I'm not offering you something simple," he said. "There's the girls and the ranch, and the town has opinions, and my brother had opinions." "Your brother apologized," she said. "I know. He told me." Something moved in his face. "I know what I'm asking isn't easy. I know what you came from. I know you've been a person other people made decisions about for your whole life without consulting you." He looked at her steadily. "I'm consulting you. That's all I know how to do." She put down the mending. She thought about the 7 doors. She thought about the Hargrove place, about the man's face and his words. Someone who can work, as if she were a category and not a person. She thought about Cal Ferris and Laramie and the 2 years she'd spent trying to stay small enough that people wouldn't look closely. She thought about the carpet bag, the $4, the road into Delham Flats, and the baby she'd heard through the window before she'd even knocked. She thought about Daisy in the garden, learning to pull weeds. Charlotte asleep on her shoulder in the middle of the night. The fence post Riker had repaired while she held the household together. The way this man had said, "I'm telling you how I intend to feel," as if her past were something to be decided about rather than handed down. "It's not simple," she said. "No," he said, "it's not. I'll have bad days. I'm not easy to live with when I'm tired, and I have a temper I've mostly learned to manage, but not entirely." "I've noticed," he said without inflection. She almost smiled. "And I'll need—" She stopped, tried again. "I'll need to be treated like I'm part of it, not kept to the side of it, not managed around it. Part." "That's what I'm asking," he said. She looked at him. This tired, careful man with his 2 daughters and his repairable ranch and his complicated brother and his cold coffee and his way of saying exactly what he meant when he finally got there. "Then, yes," she said. He nodded, like she'd confirmed something he'd thought was probably true, but hadn't been certain of, like a man who had made a careful guess and was relieved to be right. "I should probably—" he started. "One thing at a time," she said. "You should probably drink that coffee before it gets any colder." He looked at the cup. "It's already cold." "I'll make you another one," she said, and got up. He caught her hand as she passed the table. Not dramatically, just his hand around her wrist, briefly, the way you stopped something you didn't want to walk away from yet. She looked down at his hand and then at his face. "Thank you," he said, "for staying, for the fence and the bread and Charlotte and all of it, for staying." She put her free hand over his for a moment. "I stayed because it was worth staying for," she said. "That's on you." She went to make coffee. Behind her she heard him exhale, just a breath, nothing performative about it. And then the sound of him sitting back, the chair settling, a man in a house he was starting to recognize again as his. Outside, the Wyoming afternoon went on in its large, unhurried way, the light doing what it did to the yard and the pasture and the mended fence line. And somewhere in the south barn, the calf that had been off its feed during the storm was up and well because Riker had checked on it that morning and said so at breakfast. And that was the kind of thing that mattered out here, the kind of small good news that accumulated into something livable. Harper made coffee and listened to the house around her and thought that this ordinary afternoon, this kitchen, this difficult and specific and imperfect arrangement of people was the closest she had come in a long time to something she would fight to keep. She intended to keep it. The engagement was not announced so much as it became known, the way things became known in small places, by accumulation, by the ordinary movement of people who talked to other people, by the specific quality of the way Riker Boone stood next to Harper Calloway at the general store counter on a Thursday morning in September, close enough that the question answered itself. Doris Hatch saw it first, because Doris Hatch saw most things first. She looked at them standing there, Riker handing over his list, Harper with Charlotte on her hip, and Daisy pressed against her side, studying the jar candy on the counter with the focused attention of a child trying to appear casual. And her expression went through several things in quick succession before arriving somewhere that was not what Harper had expected. It arrived at something like recognition. Not approval, not yet, but the acknowledgement that a thing was real and was going to remain real, regardless of what she thought of it. "I hear congratulations are in order," she said. Riker glanced at Harper. "Word travels," he said. "It does," Doris agreed. She looked at Harper with the careful eyes of a woman who was revising something she'd held for a long time, and revision was harder than it looked, and she wasn't all the way through it yet, but she was doing it. "The baby looks well," she said. "She's grown." "She has," Harper said. "And Daisy." Doris looked at the girl who had given up on subtlety and was now openly examining the candy jars. "She seems better than she was." "She's reading well now," Harper said. Not as a boast, just as the fact it was. Something shifted in Doris's face. She went to the candy jars and selected a small piece and held it out to Daisy, who looked at Harper for permission and received a nod and took it with a polite thank you that she delivered in the particular voice she used for adults she was still working out. It was a small thing. Harper stored it alongside the other small things. Nora Finch and her preserves, Tommy Hatch, and his amended opinion, Garrett's apology in the garden, and understood that this was how places changed. Not in declarations, not in sudden reversals. In small pieces, one at a time, accruing over months until the shape of things was different from what it had been, though you couldn't say exactly when it had changed. The wedding was in October, on a day that couldn't make up its mind between autumn and something colder. There was no church ceremony. Harper had not asked for one and Riker hadn't pressed, and the justice of the peace from Delham Flats came out to the ranch on a Tuesday afternoon because that was the day he had available, which suited them fine. The ceremony was in the yard, under the Wyoming sky that was doing its particular thing that season, the light coming flat and golden from the southwest the way it did in October, making everything look like the last good version of itself before winter came to revise it. Garrett was there. He had come back 2 weeks before, as promised, and he was different in the way people were different when they had been doing quiet work on themselves. Not transformed, not wearing a changed expression, just carrying less of something that had been making him rigid. He was easier to be in a room with. Harper noticed this without commenting on it because it was his work and not hers to acknowledge. He stood beside Riker during the ceremony and handed over the ring at the right moment. A plain band, nothing elaborate, which was exactly what Harper had said she wanted and Riker had taken seriously. And afterward he shook Riker's hand and then turned to Harper and held out his hand. She shook it. "Welcome to the family," he said. He said it carefully, the way a man said something he'd been practicing getting right. "Thank you, Garrett," she said. They looked at each other for a moment. Two people who had started as opponents and ended somewhere more complicated and more honest, the way most real relationships ended if they went on long enough. "Riker's lucky," he said. "I want you to know I think that." "We're both lucky," she said. "It's not a competition." He almost smiled. "No," he said. "I suppose it's not." Nora Finch was there with her husband Tom. a broad, quiet man who shook Riker's hand warmly and said very little and seemed entirely comfortable with that. Nora had brought food, a proper spread laid on the table they'd moved to the porch, which was both practical and festive in the way frontier celebrations were, neither too much nor too little, calibrated to the actual lives of people who had work to get back to. A few others from town came. Not many. It was a Tuesday, and it was a working day, and the people who came were the ones who had decided something about Harper Calloway that was different from what they'd decided in the beginning, or the ones who had never decided against her in the first place. Harmon from the neighboring property came with his wife, a couple Riker had known for years and who had been quietly decent all along. Doris Hatch did not come. Harper hadn't expected her to, and had not invited her and harbored no particular feeling about it. Some distances closed and some didn't, and forcing the ones that weren't ready did nobody any good. Daisy wore her best dress and had let Harper braid her hair for the occasion, which was an intimacy the girl had not offered before, and which Harper had accepted as carefully as it was given. She stood very straight during the ceremony and watched the justice of the peace with the seriousness she brought to things that mattered, and afterward she came and stood beside Harper and took her hand without any announcement, just took it, the way children did when they decided something and wanted you to know without having to say it. Charlotte, 5 months old now and genuinely thriving, was passed between arms for most of the afternoon and seemed to find this acceptable. She had developed a laugh by then, a real one, sudden and surprise-sounding, as if she couldn't quite believe the world kept offering her things to find funny. Harper heard it 3 times during the celebration, and each time it landed in her chest like something important. The winter came hard, the way Wyoming winters came, and the ranch went through it. There were difficult weeks. There were weeks when the cold pushed through every gap in the house's construction, and the firewood went faster than Harper had calculated, and the animals needed more managing, and everyone was tired in the particular way of people who lived close to the limits of what a winter asked. There were days when Riker came in from the morning's work with a face so closed against the cold that it took an hour by the fire before he was himself again, and days when Harper's back gave her trouble from the accumulated physical work of the season, and evenings when they sat together too tired for much conversation, and the silence was just silence, not meaning anything beyond the fact that 2 people had worked hard and needed to be quiet. It wasn't romantic in any way that a story would choose to describe. It was 2 people in a cold house managing a hard winter with children and animals and a list of repairs that the cold kept adding to. It was arguments about the water barrel and whether the south barn needed more insulation before the February freeze and who had moved the mending basket and left it somewhere unhelpful. It was Harper losing her temper one morning, genuinely losing it, the way she'd told him she sometimes did, over something so small she couldn't remember it correctly 10 minutes later, and Riker giving her room to be angry and then coming back when the temperature had dropped and saying mildly, "You done?" and her saying, "Mostly," and them getting on with the day. Imperfect, functional, real. Daisy got through the winter primer and started the next level of reader, which she attacked with an intensity that Harper found both gratifying and occasionally exhausting. Because Daisy's method of learning a thing was to learn it completely and then ask every question it generated until she ran out of questions, which took longer than you expected. "Why does the E at the end make the vowel long?" Daisy asked one evening. "Because that's the rule," Harper said. "But why is it the rule?" "Because the people who wrote the rules decided it was." "But why did they decide that?" "Daisy, I just want to know." "I know you do," Harper said. "The honest answer is that language developed over hundreds of years through the decisions of a lot of people who weren't consulting each other, and some of the rules make logical sense, and some of them are just the way it ended up, like most things." Daisy considered this with her characteristic seriousness. "That seems disorganized," she said. "Most things are when you look closely enough," Harper said. Daisy read the next page without further questions, which suggested she was chewing on that one for a while. Harper had noticed that Daisy stored things, observations, ideas, information, and then produced them later, sometimes days later, slightly changed by whatever she'd done with them in the interval. It was a quality that would serve her well. Harper thought about what kind of woman she was going to grow into and felt a specific kind of investment in that future, the kind that surprised her sometimes with its weight. By March, the worst of the winter had broken its grip, and the ranch began breathing again. The east pasture dried first, the soil there being higher and better drained, and Riker had cattle back on it by mid-month. The kitchen garden had wintered better than Harper had expected. She'd mulched it heavily in November on a gut feeling, and the gut feeling had been right, and there was more to work with in the spring than she'd dared plan for. She started the seeds in the kitchen window in early March, small pots on the sill in the south light, and Daisy watered them with the diligence of someone who had been told exactly how much was enough and was committed to not doing more or less. Nora Finch came by in March with news that was partly social and partly practical, as Nora's visits tended to be. "The Hargrove place is selling," she said, over coffee at the kitchen table. Harper looked up from the seed catalog she'd been looking through. "Hargrove's leaving?" Riker said. "Moving east. His wife's family, I think." Nora wrapped her hands around her cup. "Tom thinks you might want to look at the east parcel. It adjoins your property on the north corner." Riker was quiet for a moment, the specific quiet of a man doing arithmetic. "It's a good parcel," he said finally. "Tom thinks so too," Nora said. Harper looked at the seed catalog, at the page she'd been on. Summer squash varieties, the kind of planning that was about more than this year, and thought about what it meant to plan beyond this year, to plan for the year after that and the one after, to think of a place as a thing you were building rather than a thing you were passing through. She had not thought that way in a long time. Years, since before Cal Ferris and Laramie and the carpet bag and the road. She had thought in short distances for so long that thinking long felt strange, like using a muscle you'd been protecting. "You should look at it," she said to Riker. He glanced at her. "It would stretch us thin." "This year," she said. "Not forever." He looked back at the table. "The south barn still needs work." "The south barn will always need work," she said. "That's what south barns do." She looked at him. "You told me the bones of this place were good. If the Hargrove parcel adjoins the north corner, that's more good bones." Nora was watching this exchange with the air of someone who had somewhere to be but was not quite ready to go yet. "Tom would go halves on the survey cost," she said, "if you wanted a neighbor's opinion." Riker looked at Harper for a long moment. She held the look without filling it. "I'll go look at it," he said. He went the following week, with Tom Finch and their combined opinion, and came back with the considered expression of a man who had seen something he wanted. "It's good land," he said. "Better than I expected." And Hargrove's asking a fair price because he wants a clean sale and not a drawn-out negotiation. He sat down. "It would stretch us thin. I wasn't wrong about that." "No," Harper agreed, but thin isn't broke. It's close to broke." "How close?" He told her the numbers. She listened to the numbers and thought about them the way she thought about practical problems, which was to say without panic and with the specific attention she brought to things that needed managing. "The garden this year," she said, "if I expand it to what it can be, what the soil will support, we can put more up for winter and cut that cost down. And I've been thinking about chickens, a proper flock, not just the 4 we have." "Chickens aren't capital," he said. "Chickens are eggs, and eggs are cash, and cash is capital," she said. "Eventually." She paused. "I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying it's possible." He looked at her across the table. This woman who had walked up his path 6 months ago with a carpet bag and $4, and the particular quality of someone who had been turned away enough times to have refined their understanding of what they could offer. And his expression had something in it that it had been acquiring slowly over the months. A particular kind of trust that wasn't blind and wasn't simple, and was therefore worth more than either. "All right," he said, "we'll make an offer." They made the offer. Hargrove accepted it inside a week, because Riker had been right about the man wanting a clean sale. And on a Thursday morning in early April, the papers were signed at the Justice of the Peace's office in Delham Flats. And the Boone Ranch acquired its north corner parcel, and Harper stood outside on the street after it was done with the sun on her face and thought about what it meant to own a piece of something. Not in the legal sense, the land was Riker's, titled to him, as was the custom, but the practical fact of it. The investment of herself in a piece of ground that was going to be here after this season and the one after, that she was going to plant and tend and argue with through droughts and early frosts, and the ordinary difficulty of making something grow in Wyoming. She thought about the 7 doors, about the Hargrove place, this man's name, this particular piece of land, the door that had been the worst because of how it had been said. Someone who can work. And here she was, having worked, having built something from a collapsing kitchen garden, and a baby who wouldn't stop crying, and a man who hadn't looked at her the way the others had, and the land that had once belonged to the man who'd said it was now part of what she was responsible for. She didn't feel triumphant about it. Triumph was too clean, too pointed, and life wasn't shaped like that. She felt something more complicated and more honest. The satisfaction of a person who had stayed long enough to see things change, not because the world had decided to be kinder to her, but because she had refused to let it have the last word. The summer brought the garden to its full potential, and then some. Harper had expanded it in April, breaking new ground along the west edge, where the soil was deep and getting morning sun, and she'd planted it properly, in rows that made sense, with spacing that wasn't optimistic, the way people who didn't know what they were doing planted, but accurate to what the plants actually needed. She grew squash and beans and carrots and onions, and the kind of things that kept well through winter, and she grew a small section of things that weren't practical at all. A row of sunflowers along the fence because Daisy had asked for them, some herbs that were more useful in cooking than strictly necessary, a few flowers that served no agricultural purpose except to exist. Daisy had taken full ownership of the carrot row. This had begun as Harper's suggestion and become Daisy's identity, to the point where other people's carrot opinions were not particularly welcome. She checked on them daily and reported on their progress at dinner with a thoroughness that occasionally exceeded the drama the carrots actually generated. "The second row is ahead of the first row," she reported one evening. "Is it?" Riker said. "By at least a week, maybe more." Any idea why? Daisy had a theory about the drainage that she had developed independently and was prepared to discuss at length. Riker listened to it with genuine attention, the kind he gave things that interested him, and not just as performance. And Harper watched him listen and thought about what it cost a man to stay present through the hard months and come out the other side still able to pay attention to a 6-year-old's drainage theory. It cost something. She knew that. She had seen it cost him things in the hard weeks of winter, the evenings when he was too tired to be fully present and knew it and felt bad about it, in the quiet way he felt bad about things. He was not a perfect father. He was a father who tried consistently and fell short sometimes and got back up, which was the definition of enough. Charlotte had learned to pull herself upright by midsummer. This happened one morning when Harper was at the kitchen shelf and she heard a small triumphant sound from the direction of the low chair, and she turned and Charlotte was standing, barely, unsteadily, gripping the chair arm with both fists like a person who has accomplished something enormous and is aware of it. And her face had the expression of complete astonished self-satisfaction. "Well," Harper said. Charlotte looked at her. Then her legs gave out and she sat down hard on the floor, and there was a moment of her deciding whether this outcome warranted crying, and then she grabbed the chair arm and started pulling herself back up. Harper watched her do it 3 more times before she went to get Riker. He came in and watched his daughter stand up and fall down and stand up again, and his face did something that people's faces did when they saw a thing they didn't have words ready for. He looked at Harper and she looked at him, and between them passed the particular acknowledgement of people who have watched something grow, the knowledge of what it had been and the simultaneous knowledge of what it was now, and the work that had happened between those 2 points. Nora Finch brought her youngest daughter to play with Daisy on a Saturday in August and stayed for an hour on the porch. The 2 women in the particular ease of a friendship that had been built from practical materials. Honesty, proximity, the shared experience of working hard in a place that didn't always cooperate. "The town has changed its mind," Nora said. "Not about anything specific, about everything." "Mostly," Harper said. "Doris came to me last week," Nora said. "She asked me to pass something along." She reached into her pocket and produced a small paper envelope. She sent these for Daisy, said she remembered the girl had been looking at the candy jars. Harper took the envelope and looked at it for a moment. Small things. The language of small things, the only way some people had to say what they couldn't say directly. "I'll give it to her," she said. "It's not an apology," Nora said carefully. "No," Harper agreed, "but it's something." She didn't feel bitter about Doris. She had room to feel bitter about Doris. She'd earned that room, but she found she didn't particularly want to occupy it. Some people moved slowly toward being better, and some people didn't move at all. And Doris was moving in her particular way, and that was more than Harper had expected 6 months ago. The world was not going to become a simple place. People were not going to become uncomplicated. The things that had happened in her life, Cal Ferris, Laramie, the years of moving and being assessed and found wanting, were not going to be erased by a good marriage and a repaired kitchen garden, because that was not how anything worked. Those things were in her, part of the material she was made of, and they would come up sometimes in ways she couldn't entirely predict or control. She knew this about herself. She knew that there would be days when the old caution would come back, when she would go quiet in rooms, when she would wait for the rearrangement of someone's face, when she would brace for impact before impact had been announced. That had been in her long enough that it wasn't going to leave completely, but it was less than it had been. That was the thing she could say honestly. It was less. One evening in late August, Riker came in from the North Parcel. They were his and Harper's words for it now, a specific language that said whose it was. And he had something in his expression that she had learned to recognize as the outer edge of contentment, the look of a man who has been outside with good land and good light and has come back with something he can't quite name. He washed up and sat down and ate the supper she'd kept warm, and Daisy told him about the carrots. The second row was ready, definitely ready. She had checked that morning, and would check again tomorrow to be sure. And Charlotte, sitting in the high chair she'd recently graduated to, demonstrated her latest skill, which was banging a spoon against the tray with tremendous enthusiasm and no particular rhythm. Harper watched this over her own plate and thought about the word home, which was a word she had always been slightly suspicious of, the way people were suspicious of things that had let them down. Home was a word people used for the place they had, which sometimes was the place they'd built and sometimes was the place they'd ended up in, and sometimes was just the best available option that they'd decided to call something grander than it was. She didn't think that was what this was. This was this specific table, this specific man, this child with her theories about drainage, and this baby with her spoon. This was the thing the word had been pointing at, the thing she'd been unable to reach for most of her life because she'd been too busy moving, and it had not arrived as a reward. It had not arrived because she'd finally done enough, or been enough, or proven enough. It had arrived because she had walked through a gate one morning to find out why a baby was crying, and because she had stayed when it would have been easier to leave, and because Riker Boone had looked at her, when he finally looked, and seen a person. That was all it had taken. In the end, one person looking and actually seeing, which was, she had come to understand, the rarest and most ordinary thing in the world. Garrett came back for a visit in September, a year after the first time he'd ridden up that road with opinions about a woman he didn't know. He came in the afternoon and walked the North Parcel with Riker and came back to the house with mud on his boots and an expression that was satisfied in a way that had nothing to do with being right. He sat at the table for supper and passed Charlotte to his shoulder when she got fussy. She knew him now, accepted him the way she accepted people who had been consistently present, which was without dramatics. And he played the spoon game she liked and made her laugh twice. After supper, when Riker had gone out to check on the animals and Daisy was in bed and Charlotte was asleep, Garrett sat at the table with the last of his coffee, and Harper sat across from him, and they were quiet for a while in the way people were quiet when they'd come through something together. "The North Parcel," he said finally. "That was the right call." "It was Riker's call," Harper said. "It was both of yours," he said. He looked at his cup. "The place looks different than it did a year ago." "A lot has happened in a year." "Yes," he said. He turned the cup. "I want to say, I know I apologized in the garden. I meant it then. But I want to say it again now that some time has passed and I can see what's here more clearly." "Garrett, let me," he said. "I came here with a story about who you were, built from someone else's words, and I used it to make a decision that could have cost Riker something he needed, and you something you needed, and those girls something they needed." He looked at her. "I was wrong. Not just about the facts of it, but about the method. About deciding things about people from outside of them." Harper looked at him. A year ago, she had stood in this kitchen and watched this man through the window and felt the bracing that had become her posture. "You came back," she said, "when Charlotte was sick, in a storm." "That's a low bar," he said. "You'd be surprised," she said quietly, "how many people don't clear it." He was quiet for a moment. I don't know you well, he said. Not really. But I know what I've seen this year, and what I've seen is you kept the faith with this family when it would have been easy not to, when nobody would have blamed you for leaving. He paused. That's a person worth knowing. Harper looked at the table between them. The worn wood, the ring from a hot cup that had been there long before she had, the small ordinary surface of a life being lived. We'll get there, she said, knowing each other. He nodded. I expect we will. October came around again, and the light did the same thing it had done the year before, coming flat and golden from the southwest, making everything look like the last good version of itself. Harper was in the garden on a Saturday morning, the last of the summer work, pulling the spent vines and clearing the beds for winter. Daisy was helping with the carrot row. The final harvest, performed with the ceremony the occasion deserved, each carrot pulled and examined and placed in the basket with a care that the carrots probably didn't require, but that Daisy felt they deserved. Charlotte was on a blanket at the edge of the garden, sitting up on her own now, batting at the grass with both hands and narrating to herself in the language she was developing, which had the rhythm and intention of speech without most of the recognized words yet. Riker came around the corner of the house and stopped when he saw them. The three of them in the October light, the garden nearly put to bed, the last carrots coming up. Harper looked up at him. He had that expression again, the one from the North parcel, the one that had come to mean something specific. Everything all right? She said. Fine, he said. He made a gesture that indicated the general situation. The garden, the blanket, the three of them. I wanted to see it. She understood. There were things you needed to look at sometimes, not because they required looking at, but because you wanted to confirm they were real, that the distance between where you'd been and where you were was actual and not something you'd convinced yourself of. She went back to the vines. He came into the garden and crouched beside Charlotte and let the baby grab his finger, which she did with the grip strength that continued to surprise everyone. And he said something to her in a low voice that Harper didn't catch, and Charlotte responded with her sudden laugh, the one that always landed in Harper's chest. Daisy held up a carrot. This one's the best one, she said. How can you tell? Riker said. Because it's straight and it's heavy and the color is right, Daisy said. Also, I pulled it. Those are good criteria, he said. She put it in the basket with the others and kept going. Harper cleared the last of the spent bean vines and stood up and looked at the garden, at what it had been in May when she'd turned the first new soil, and what it had become by August, and what it was now, done for the season but not done, the beds ready to be mulched and rested and brought back in spring. She thought about this word worth, about what it meant, about how it got assigned, about all the ways people had decided what she was worth based on things she could not change, her size, her first husband's debts, her address, the rumors that had followed her out of Laramie like dogs that had learned her scent. Worth was not, she had come to understand, something that got decided once. It was not a verdict handed down by the people at the first 6 doors or the 7th, or Garrett Boone on a porch telling her she was the wrong woman for the job. Worth was the accumulated evidence of what a person actually did over time in the specific circumstances they were given. It was Daisy learning to read. It was Charlotte's fever breaking. It was a kitchen garden that fed a family through a hard winter. It was a north parcel that had been somebody else's and was now part of something being built. It was not perfect. She was not perfect. The ranch was not perfect. Riker was not perfect, and Garrett was not perfect, and Daisy was a 6-year-old with opinions about carrots, and Charlotte would grow up into a person with problems. Harper couldn't predict, and there would be bad winters and bad years and arguments that didn't resolve cleanly, and days when the work was too much, and days when the distance between what she wanted and what she had felt like more than she could manage. That was what it was. Imperfect and ongoing and worth staying for. She picked up the basket of carrots and carried it to the porch, and set it down and looked out at the yard, at the repaired fence, the sealed barn, the garden put to bed, the pasture going gold in the October light. Riker came to stand beside her. Charlotte was on his arm, babbling. Daisy had come out of the garden with her last carrot held up like something she'd won. Good harvest? Riker said. Good enough, Harper said. It was, she thought, the truest thing she'd said in a long time. Not great, not perfect, not the word wonderful that people put on things they wanted to be better than they were. Good enough. The words of a person who had learned the difference between settling and accepting, between giving up and being at peace, between a place you ended up and a place you chose. She had chosen this. Every morning she had gotten up and chosen it again, and she would get up tomorrow and choose it again. And that was not a small thing. That daily choosing, even when it didn't look like anything from the outside. Especially then. The Wyoming sky went on above them, wide and impersonal and indifferent in the way large things were indifferent. Not cruel, just vast. The kind of vast that put human troubles in proportion without making them meaningless. Under it, you could feel both very small and entirely sufficient, if you let yourself. Harper let herself. The woman who had been turned away from 7 doors, who had walked into this yard with mud on her boots and a carpet bag, and a reputation that wasn't hers, and a history she'd had to carry anyway. That woman was here. She hadn't been replaced by anyone better or simpler or easier to love. She was just here, in the same body she'd always had, with the same past and the same specific flaws, standing on a porch she had earned. The carrots were going to be good this winter. The north parcel would be ready for spring. Charlotte was going to learn to walk any day now, and when she did, she was going to do it the way she did everything, suddenly, without warning, as if she'd been planning it for weeks and had simply decided this was the moment. Daisy put the last carrot in the basket and came to stand on Harper's other side and leaned against her arm without saying anything, the way she'd started doing, the way she'd decided was all right to do. Harper put her arm around her. The afternoon held them all for a moment, imperfect, specific, real. Then Charlotte threw her spoon into the yard, and Daisy went to retrieve it, and Riker said something under his breath that was probably mild profanity, and Harper laughed, genuinely, the kind that came from the right place. And the moment passed into the ordinary life that had produced it, which was exactly, she thought, what a moment like that was supposed to do.